Sam, man, thanks so much for coming on the show here today. Really excited to have you on. Could you start by just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure thing. Yeah, good to be here, Mike. Thank you for having me. Um, I am Sam Miller. I'm the founder and CEO of Proteus Motion, company that I started in 2016. We are headquartered in Brooklyn, New York. I'm based in Charleston, South Carolina. We've got team kind of spread throughout the country, mostly remote. I've got two young boys, three and a, or 4.5 years old and 1.5 years old. And,
Oh, man. Oh, yeah. You got your
yeah.
hands full, dude.
Oh man, I
Probably
totally.
not sleeping either.
Yeah, not much. So aside from my family, my passion in life is really what we're doing at Proteus, and that's around creating a total revolution in human performance in a very unique way. But yeah, through and through, I'm just like a passionate person. Background that's very diverse, from engineering to I studied history and economics in school.
Oh, wow.
To design operations and just truly an entrepreneur that's trying to do something that helps a lot of people, and especially athletes, yeah, which I consider everyone an athlete to a certain
Yes.
extent.
Yes. Love that.
And on the way do something that we think is historically significant.
Yeah, that's very cool, man. So talk to me. What got you into the world of physical preparation? Like, how did you start working out, or what made you realize, oh, this is something I think I might want to do, either for myself or with others?
Yeah, good question. So I grew up in outside of Boston in the
Yeah.
suburbs, and I grew up playing every sport imaginable. Grew up on like a cul-de-sac and with all these kids my age, and we were
Yeah.
just outside, beating each other up all the time. My main focus was soccer,
Okay.
but I played literally every sport. And I developed a really painful joint condition in my knee when I was around like 9, 10 years old.
Okay.
And I spent the ages like 9 through 14 in physical therapy and athletic training and back and forth and back and forth. And I always say like I peaked athletically when I was like 12, winning like a state championship and in soccer, and then it was just
Yeah.
like I had these knee conditions, and I had to kind of fight back, and then I'd say I have a second peak in late high school, but training, the training and performance evaluations that I was doing in both athletic training and in my physical therapy. Kind of like created this deep-seated frustration, I think, around limitations of the tools and information that can be used to inform significantly better quality of services and treatment and outcomes. And what I really was doing was a lot of this like isolated kind of muscle or joint testing and training, right? Not
Right.
really so much multiplanar or functional per se. And I remember distinctly like one day walking out of a session with one of my teammates who had coming back from like a severe oblique strain. And we walked out of this, session with a piece of paper that had like exactly the same training program on it.
Wow. That's
And
bad. That's
yeah,
bad.
it's bad. And I think I realized like this had nothing to do with the, quality of the trainers or the clinicians. It was really just like there's just limitations in how they can make decisions to personalize something for you. And there's limitations in tools that exist. So fast forward like 20 years, I graduated from Vanderbilt. Like I said, I studied economics and history, totally different career path. And at the same time, I became super interested in the quantified self movement. And in like biometrics. And the more I explored the space, I started to wonder, we've got cameras for biomechanics, we've got wearables for sleep measurements. Like, what is the equivalent for physical strength, especially functional strength or power? It's like we're kind of still looking at like squats and a bench press, and there didn't seem to be too much progression there. And I think that led to this kind of like conclusion in my mind that the way physical strength and power, I think, is evaluated and trained a lot, but primarily evaluated. It's very one dimensional.
Yes.
And I think the 1D movements that are used today, even to evaluate strength, represent less than 5% of the movements that we perform in real life. And they're simply, it's extraordinarily difficult to quantify that for 3D or multiplanar movements. And so basically that concluded with me knowing that there was a huge void in data around one
Okay.
of the most critical pillars of human performance. So just an extension of that quickly, the connected around this time, like the connected fitness space started to really expand and explode. And I think the problem that I was seeing was that a lot of the advancements there, that everyone's basically digitizing an existing piece of equipment, like put a sensor on a bike, a screen on a cable machine.
Right.
And what that's doing is it's great. It's gauging content. So there's some great products out there, but it's not actually able to generate any new or different information, which I viewed as one of the primary problems is void in data.
Yeah.
So I spent like a couple of years from 2012 to 2015, kind of like while I was fully employed in a construction engineering company,
Yeah.
and talking to like hundreds of professionals, reading thousands of research articles and medical textbooks. And, I got to the point where it's like that Henry Ford quote where like, if I had asked people what they wanted, they'd say a faster horse. Right. And like,
Sure.
so nobody like imagined what the solution would be, but everyone identified that like, yeah, the way that we are evaluating this incredibly important pillar of human performance is one dimensional.
Yeah.
And so the solution that I kind of conjured up was the need to create an entirely new type of equipment altogether and do
Okay.
that for the purpose of generating data and building software around it. And so I that set off on that course. I got heavy inspiration for this solution by kind of rebooting something that my dad invented at MIT in the early 90s.
Okay.
And he was a visiting scientist in the early 90s at the biomechanics lab. Had this like idea to come up with a mechanical system that would allow you he was trying to do replicating sport movements, and it didn't work. But it was a brilliant concept. And so he had spun out of MIT and was like tinkering like a mad scientist in the basement of my house outside of Boston for years. And it was always referred to as like the machine. But nobody knew what it was or what it did, and it didn't really work. But the underlying principles were brilliant. So I kind of actually took that and, 25 years later, and figured out a way to redesign it using some of the underlying mechanical principles, and then from there made that system work, and then used that to build kind of software and data systems around it. So basically,
Wow.
I kind of left my job in 2015, started bootstrap for 18 months, like a closet, based in New York City. And, in 2016, I actually incorporated, and, we spent the first 4 years, I think like really 1 to 3 people in like a windowless startup incubator, patenting things, partnering with some notable health institutions, building machines myself, driving around in a van. And fast forward again, in the last like 24 months, I think we've grown 20 times.
Oh, wow.
We've got, some of the best athletes in the world, like Patrick Mahomes and, Damian Lillard and John
Yeah.
Rahm using the system. Some of the best trainers in the world, like Eric Cressy and Bobby Stroop. And, we're in this Netflix series now. And we've got really explosive growth to almost 400 locations in the US and Canada, and we're just getting started.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Man, before we dive too hard into the actual device, what I would love to hear a little bit more about is what was your day like for those first 4 years, right? When you're working construction and then you're at home. I can just imagine like just burning the candle at both ends, right? Like working a full-time job, coming home, like reading research, mad scientist in the basement. Like, I don't know what you were doing, but what did your life look like at that point in time?
Well, one thing I'll say is that the woman who I was dating and who I married has been a huge played a huge role in this journey, just being a believer from day one.
Yeah.
And through and like anyone that started any business, doesn't matter what kind of business, it's just hard, right?
Yes, for sure.
There's no
For sure.
way, there's no easy path, right? And so much of it is just about like just persevering and figuring out a way. You like things are going to suck, and they
Yes.
there's highs are highs, lows lows, and they get higher and higher and lower and all that sort of stuff. So and that is all 100% true from my experience. So I had I was kind of moved into this engineering role. We were building healthcare and life sciences laboratories and big medical office buildings and biosafety labs and so forth. I moved out of engineering into product management and project management for some of those jobs that were like $10 million jobs to $300 million jobs and
Oh wow.
big contracts and then I moved into business operations. So I was kind of all over the place anyways, but for me, I knew very early on, I was like, I have no interest in this like climb the ladder,
Of corporate
I was
America.
doing really well, but I just was hungry. Right. And so I had already started some like side entrepreneurial ventures when I was like in my, right out of college when I graduated in Vanderbilt in 2008 and the market crashed like that same year. And so a couple of years later, I got really interested in like depressed real estate and I figured out a way to like borrow money to buy a couple of like, foreclosure and short sale condos in South Florida when I was like 25 and became like a landlord. And so I was like always involved in these like kind of, these kind of like side ventures because I was just trying to figure it out. So once I got interested in the idea of Proteus, it started as like an interest and then it turned into a passion and then into an obsession. And then now it's like my life. And so the day for me was just like, I was by the end of my employment in my previous career, I will say I was breaking a lot of rules with time, try to like, if taking like exploratory calls about Proteus, on, in the middle of the day, like stuff like that. It would not super outrageous, but like, and then it was just like nights, mornings, weekends, and it just consumed a lot of things. And fortunately my wife, who I think was my fiance at the time during this, she was very understanding because she was like, I kind of believe in you. And I don't, at a certain point, she was like, I don't understand this. But like, that was early on but she's like, I believe in you. And I know that there's something here. And then, that's always been a barometer of like success or progress for me is like her level of understanding. Now she's like,
now she gets it.
She gets it. And so, so, I mean, it was a big balance of, professional and, I guess like side hustle, to the extent that I got to a point where I was like, all right, I can't pretend to be caring about this job or career. Like I already know what I want to do. I had no idea about what it was going to take and what the journey would look like. And, but I mean, aside from the time scale being different, we're doing exactly, and I can see a lot more clearly, like where we're headed is basically exactly what the vision or prediction has been from the beginning. Just the time and the path to getting there has been very different.
Absolutely. It always does. So talk to me about how this whole thing unfolded, right? Because I'm sure people are listening to this and they're like, oh, cool. Like I've heard of Proteus Motion, or maybe I've seen, people demoing on it. But you and I both know if you're an entrepreneur, there's like a vision, right? In the vision, a concept, and in your space, it's not just like, hey, it's this, and then it's like a digital product, right? There's a concept, and then there's how many iterations of prototypes, and then you finally actually have something that functions and works. So would you talk to me about that process? How long that took, maybe some of the struggles you dealt with there?
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, one thing I'll start by saying is that hardware is hard. It's really hard, and hardware plus software is even harder. So I think for me, I was. It's still to this day, I'll say, something that to really understand it, you need to you really want to touch and feel it
Yeah.
and experience it in person. This is its own animal, right? This is not like this is nothing similar to anything that's existed before. This is not a cable machine. This is not it's its own modality, it's its own animal. And so what's interesting too is that like even customers that we had early on are still peeling back layers of Proteus, and some of the ones that were like took the longest to like get there, right, are like so bought in and like completely under. So seeing the community expand is amazing, but it's
Yeah.
taken a long time to get there. So to really, it started with having some form of a prototype, and I bootstrapped this myself for on a shoestring budget for 18 months. But it got to a certain point where I'm like, I need outside capital to
Right.
do anything here, especially with like, it's not like we were like, hey, I need to like buy a exercise bike and then like figure out how to put sensors on it.
Right.
Not to like downgrade what the challenges of say a Peloton went through. They were just different,
Sure.
right? But for us, it was like we needed like expensive machinery and custom parts and all this stuff, and it was like I need funding for this. So I
Right.
kind of got to a point where I had taken this prototype that my dad had and like kind of just rebuilt it and reconfigured it and had it produce some output on a screen that it wasn't really much of anything, but it was really just for a talking point. And it
Yes.
was just trying to imagine painting the picture of what this vision was. And for me, it was actually difficult raising capital, especially early on, because the size of the opportunity was unclear. And at this time, like even like human performance, like that term was like it wasn't really like used that much, or
Yeah.
that it was like so. And I was talking about these things and athlete evaluations and performance assessments and like longevity in 2015, 2016, and people were kind of like, especially on the investment side, are kind of like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And so that was challenging, but I cobbled together a couple of like starting with like friends and family, and then moved into like some subsequent capital raises, all very small and or relatively small. But the process is basically build, refine, test, iterate, right? Refine again, rebuild, right? Test,
Yeah.
iterate. It's just that cycle over and over again. And I have literally have scars on my hands from you know doing this kind of stuff. And I brought in some early hires, some of them starting part time, and just looking for the kind of people that were not just like exceptionally smart, but had no qualms about rolling up their sleeves and like just getting dirty, getting
Yeah.
into it. Like that is the kind of people. That's who our team is at its core. Where it's like we work harder than anyone, right?
Yeah.
And we're super passionate and like have the highest kind of moral and ethical standards. And so that's kind of who we are. So I was looking for people that were just like not afraid to do that. And I was setting the example because I'm like, I'm still this day working extraordinarily hard.
Right.
And so a lot of it was just like, build a couple machines, nothing worked. But I think we started to get little signals here and there. I remember one time I convinced a college baseball coach at St. Joe's to let us, bring a one of the first prototypes over to test his whole team. And, we had like 3 people on our team kind of standing around it, like screwing bolts back in and like, you know what I mean? Like everything is
Yeah.
falling apart. But, during that day, over the course of that day, the coaches and the players are like, I love this.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm like, we haven't even done really anything here. Like, we've done a lot, but it's like nowhere near. So, and like those kinds of things, that's enough to be like, okay, we've got a ways to go, but there's some good feedback. And then it was just that
Yep.
repeated over and over again, and me just kind of banging on doors to let somebody just let me bring it to them to show it to them, or them come to me and test it out. And every single time without fail, once we developed the system that actually you could actually feel it and feel what this 3D resistance modality is, which is constant in all directions, it feels like moving underwater, but on land. And then you could start to see the data outputs, and we were, it was very compelling. Without fail, anyone that came and experienced it was like, okay, this is not what I expected, or this is, I think I get it now, or at least where you're headed, and there's something big here. So it was all about how we can get more people onto it. And then to me, it just went from, the next thing was like, we started to get some good feedback in a commercial gym environment. One of our first clients in not San Mateo, Menlo Park, at the Rikers Center. And they fell in love with it. It was a second or third machine. And that started to go really well. And then we were like, okay, we need to find like an ambassador that's really credible and who's not the kind of person that like you can just pay to endorse something.
Yeah,
but
sure.
You have to work to, and that led us to like, we were like, okay, Eric Cressy's our guy, because we were starting to get big in baseball. And
it's hard to beat him. It's hard to beat him.
He didn't answer my phone calls for 18 months. And finally I basically like forced my way into, took a truck and drove a machine to him in Boston, and like basically showed up, and he let us in, and once he got his hands on it, his brain exploded, and he's a cerebral guy. And
absolutely.
And then he's one of our, that was in 2019. And so we've just been evolving from there.
Yeah. No, that's so cool. If you are listening to this on the road, I will drop in like whatever, Sam, you think is like the best video or two. I'll drop into the show notes. So you can see the unit, so you can see what training looks like, because it's probably hard to visualize. But when you're pitching people, right, again, this is hard to visualize. Most people are thinking, oh, hey, I've got squats or like barbells, dumbbells, kettlebells. They can envision these things, right, because they've seen it. For somebody that's never seen this, how do you describe to them, maybe over the phone or not visually, like what does training feel like with this device? And again, I like the idea of like kind of working out in a pool, but is that kind of how you describe it to other people, or?
The experience, yeah. I mean, I think from an overall value proposition standpoint, I mean, one thing to say is, so we were almost entirely B2B. So we sell into, commercial gyms, sell the hardware and software to commercial gyms, to pro and college sports teams. We're even in chiropractic.
That's
therapy.
Cool.
We're kind of, we've got a pretty, across a variety of different verticals. We've got about 400 partner sites in the US and Canada. We have about 75,000 users. That range from age 8 to age 98.
That's cool.
There's unbelievable versatility. So a couple things to think when you're thinking about Proteus is, it's both a performance testing tool and a resistance training tool. All right.
Yep.
When you think about it as a performance testing tool, it's a sports science lab in a box.
Mm-hmm.
What it does is it allows you to do what it would require 20 pieces of equipment in a lab in 3 hours of time to do 10% of what we do in 5 minutes. And what we do in 5 minutes is basically provide us assessments and reports that let somebody understand across any combination of movements or standardized tests within our software, or your own, whether it's trug rotations and uniplanar presses and rows, or upper extremity, lower extremity, whatever you want to test or evaluate, understands where you have weakness. Are you progressing? How do you compare to someone like you against our cloud database that has 1 billion data points?
Wow.
Which is new normative data, and shareable kind of reports that give these hyper personalized recommendations for training and what the implications are, from exercise selection to even, where, if you're familiar with the force velocity curve, like where you fall on the force velocity curve, and then how you should be training different movements. And some of the insights are incredible, because you have somebody run through one of our standardized tests, 15 movements across the whole body. And no matter what demographic you look at, it, core, trunk rotation and core strength and power are the most efficient.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah.
And so what this allows you to do is basically understand the someone's capabilities and contextualize that against someone that they know, and then basically make informed training decisions. And a lot of our partner sites use that information as a cheat sheet, basically. It's like a hack for them to be able to say, all right, in a couple of minutes, I literally know exactly how to design a program for somebody, right?
Mm-hmm.
What they need specifically, right? And I can show them, are they progressing, how they compare. We've got things like leaderboards, all that shiny stuff. And then it completely lets them elevate the quality of their services. It allows them to expand their services into premium services depending on their model. And many of our sites monetize this on top of the operational efficiency from being able to do this with a novice trainer, right? So that's the sports science lab in a box element. And the beautiful thing about Proteus is that it's not just sitting there and waiting to be tested on every week, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever.
Right.
80% of the usage of Proteus is for resistance training. And so I'll go back as a testing tool. It's the ultimate tool. If you care about physical strength and power, like you need a Proteus because it's the only tool in the world that allows you to evaluate it across the entire body, especially for multiplanar movements and rotational movements, period. As a training tool, though, it is not meant to be a replacement for everything that you have in your gym. It's a tool in your toolkit. Yeah. And so what that looks like is, for example, someone will come in and get tested. Trainer will say, all right, now I know exactly what you need to work on. And they'll work that into their own methodologies and their own systems, right? Because we don't want to undercut the trainer. We want this to be a elevation for them, an enhancement for them, superpower for them. And then they will design a program, and 99 times out of 100, Proteus is one of the training tools that's used in combination with these other traditional training tools that are used. So the reason Proteus is used and how is we've invented a new modality of resistance. Right. And we call it 3D resistance. It feels like training underwater, and you can change the viscosity of the fluid or the force field, if you will. Yes. So it's constant in all directions, no matter what speed or direction you move. It's completely different experience than a cable machine. It's physically impossible to get this from a cable machine. You need a kind of a rigid arm, which is what the Proteus, why it has that carbon fiber too. It's rigid and why it has a form factor. And what this does is it provides this incredible neuromuscular stimulation. There's a great new book that came out actually on the from the Fascial Training Institute, Bill Parisi's new book. It's called Fascial Training and Application. And there's 2 full chapters on Proteus, and this came out, I think, a couple of weeks ago. And so there are significant benefits for the fascial system, coordination, proprioception. And what it does is, the research that we've done is it shows it produces up to 95% greater peak muscle activation than a free weight or a cable machine, because it's resisting you throughout the entire range of motion of a multiplanar movement without inertia. And so that's used for anything from very intense, high intensity interval training to warm-ups, cool downs, active recovery. We see a lot of, and ultimately what it is, it's the ultimate tool for developing triplanar power and speed. And so if you watch Quarterback on Netflix, for example, the reason Patrick Mahomes uses it 3 times a week is because he's doing this multiplanar power and acceleration and speed development, explosive movements on Proteus. And so that's one of the benefits for elite athletes. At the same time, just the last point is that this is so versatile that it's incredibly safe to use from early postoperative rehab to peak performance training. And while we've got users that are age 8 to 98, the fastest growing demographic we have is like the 35 to 65-year-old group. Yeah. And one of the reasons they love it so much is because it's a concentric muscle contraction. So you can use it almost every day without soreness, but you still get these benefits. Now, at the same time, though, it's super low impact on the joints. And ultimately, it helps you move better and feel better. So it's this new experience like training underwater on land, super time efficient workouts in our library of workouts. So you can kind of do a freestyle mode. And it is an incredible tool for developing core strength and full body strength and power, which is a very an area that was underrepresented, I think, or
For
not
sure.
appropriately represented in general training, despite everyone's acknowledgement of how important it is.
Yeah, dude. There's so much to unpack there.
Yeah.
So much to unpack. Like just starting with like the idea of assessments driving programming. Like Bill and I, Eric too, because I mean we created a product together, Assess and Correct, in like 2010, where we're basically giving people self-evaluations. Right, this is how you evaluate your movement, and these are the corrective exercises you use. Right, just thinking about that side of it, and something that I've harped on for a while now is this idea of the reason that we spend so much time focusing on assessing strength is because it's the easiest thing to do, right? It requires no tech to put a barbell on somebody's back, right? Okay, let's work up until you can't squat anymore, or a bench press, or a deadlift. Easy to evaluate. Versus you start talking about force velocity curves, using force plates. Now there's technology involved. There's awareness of how to use the technology. Oh, and by the way, you had to create an entirely different machine to assess and evaluate what you're looking at. So that alone is super, super cool. But then taking that a step further, I love the idea because I'm just past the point of like tiptoeing around this idea. Like if you own a gym or if you want to be in this space for any period of time, you have to be comfortable asking people for money, right? You could be the best trainer, best programs, best coach. If you're not willing to ask people for money and get paid for what you do, you're not going to be in this game very long. So finding ways like this to monetize what you're doing, in this case, hey, we're going to take you through this killer performance assessment. Nobody else around here is going to do this. We're going to take you through that. But it's not just an assessment. This is going to drive our programming. We're going to show you reproducible results. I'm just like, my mind is spinning thinking about like, this is sellable across the board. And you check the box as well of, hey, I love athletes, right? I still consider myself an athlete, but I'm 45. So the peak was a few years ago in my case, but now I'm in that space, right? Like I train athletes, but the space that I'm in and that like my online clients are in, we're like longevity focused. So
Yes.
how can we play this game for as long as possible? So I love that it checks that box as well. That's really cool.
Yeah, it's spot on. It's been very, very cool to see how especially our early adopter clients, helped us almost try, figuring out, the different ways to utilize it. And what we've done is kind of package. There's so much validation on the not just social side, but the business case side. And we've got all these fantastic ROI case studies. And we've seen some of our sites, they've started to, especially the entrepreneurial ones, they'll do combines and they'll bring in 30 athletes on a weekend and they'll do performance testing on Proteus, test 30 kids in 2 hours and make $4,500 on a Saturday.
Yeah.
And it's like unbelievable. And some of these sites are just absolutely killing it. Now at the same time, we have others that Proteus is actually is actually relatively transportable, believe it or not. And
I'm shocked by that.
There's a couple of things. One is there's actually wheels that come out of the bottom.
Okay.
But we've got a couple of partners that have we're starting to see a lot more of like sites getting 2 units, 3 units, 4 units. And we've got a couple of our partners that have a unit designated in a Proteus trailer, and they will bring it to
That's cool.
nearby schools or whatever, do performance testing. And this is the kicker, is what they will do is they'll use that information to very easily create a program for someone that person is going to do remotely.
Yeah.
And then that person will like come back to retest the facility, right? Like, and he basically built expanded his online and like the digital business using this anchor tool. And
that's
we're
cool.
playing into that with something that on the AI side that's very, very exciting, that I'll hope to have an update on and that I can talk about in a couple of months. But nevertheless, this is a tool. It's like, this is not a toy.
Yeah.
This becomes like most of the sports performance sites we work with are doing 300 to 1,000 monthly sessions on Proteus consistently. It is one of the most commonly used pieces of equipment, highest used piece of equipment in these facilities. It becomes a focal point. And the trainers really rely on it to make decisions while the athletes, they love using it and they're seeing great results. And so we've built this whole community platform, like a trainer certification with different tiers, and then this community platform that our sites get access to it that has turnkey marketing resources and ROI playbooks and even like further education and message boards and so forth. But the certain tiers of the certification lets your site get certified and get on a Proteus location finder map, because we have so many athletes coming to us saying, where's the nearest one? And we want to steer them to our sites because we want our sites to win.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
There's a lot of really, really interesting, exciting, like testing center, mentality out there right now. Some sites absolutely killing it right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's definitely something that I've enjoyed and something I see myself getting into more as I evolve, right? Like it's just a natural progression. I love evaluating the movement, and this just gives us a way to quantify movement, because 23 years of coaching people, I can say, oh, well, that knee position is bad, but you can't demonstrate sometimes a knee position to a kid or a parent. But if I can say, hey, look, your right whatever is 25% weaker, slower, whatever than your left, now I've got something quantifiable that they can tether things to, and then we can go.
Quick hits. It's like quick
absolutely.
Hits. We learned the hard way too, because it was the first couple of years was like we produced all this data, we were really proud of it, and then we realized like nobody cares.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And we were like, oh wait, of course, like nobody cares because these are busy professionals. It needs to be, and it took us a couple of years to figure out how to deliver it, how to make sense of it, and we're just getting started. But now it's like, a novice trainer can use this, and it's like it lets them become an intermediate trainer, and it lets you know what I mean. So it's
That's
really
awesome.
It's really powerful.
That's cool. Okay, so I'm going to ask this question, and it may seem incredibly basic, but I also never want to assume things. So you talk about 3D resistance. What athletes do you see using Proteus the most? Because I can see tons of different opportunities and spaces, but like, what are the bulk of your data points coming from? What sports?
Yeah. So the largest demographic of users that we have is high school and college athletes.
Yep.
And of those athletes, the most kind of dominant category of sport would be baseball.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, we also have a large user base of golf, of expanding in football, and basketball, MMA and boxing for sure.
Oh yeah.
Softball without question. We have, and any athlete, any and all athletes benefit from this. And we've got, from some of the best players in Major League Baseball to, Mahomes and, John Rahm and Bryson DeChambeau and Damian Lillard and, Blake Griffin and like those guys. So it's valuable and applicable for all kind of ages and sport type. For the high school and college athlete, particularly though, we see a lot of like overtraining of the sagittal plane.
Oh yeah. Yes.
And, and I think our data has exposed that that's a fact. Like that's those are the movements, and that plane of movement are the areas that need strength the least. And which is really interesting. And so one of the things that we've found with these like macro analyses that we've done of 1 billion data points is like, looking at these commonalities between groups and common deficiencies and like, and what it's shown us is that there's a lot of commonalities, including that like, the rotational movements for power and acceleration tend to be the most deficient. The ones that the sagittal plane movements are the most lacking in acceleration, by the way. And we've taken that further and looked at, you mentioned longevity. We've looked at things like how does strength and power change as you age? And some of the insights are the following. One is that you lose 10% of power across the entire body every 10 years you age. That's actually a known thing that's been researched before.
Yeah,
but
sure.
The thing that we confirm that, but the thing that was really interesting that we found is that you lose power for rotational movements 20% faster than unipolar movements as you age.
Wow.
So as you get older, if there were movement types or movement categories to be focusing on, those are the ones.
That's very cool. That's very cool because immediately when I hear 3D resistance, I think 3D rotational sports, right? Baseball, softball, tennis, golf. Those make sense. Obviously, I'm a basketball guy, so I saw Damian Lillard using it. That's pretty cool. That's a big name guy. But yeah, it was just really cool to start thinking about, okay, the different uses of it, where it fits in. And yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of use and a lot of versatility, it sounds like, with this. So that's very cool to see.
Yeah, too much versatility. I'd say it's been a challenge for us to like narrow our focus to try to
Mm-hmm.
not do too much and target too many. Because what we find is the sites we work with, they are like, it's too much versatility. I'm making a second or third machine, and it can also actually create confusion because they're like, you've got a 98-year-old doing it because they can do movements on Proteus that they can't do safely with a free weight, and then next to
Yes.
it, you've got a college athlete who's like gonna, go into a NFL combine in the
Right.
week, and you're like, how are these two people using the same machine very differently and for different benefits and reasons? But it's incredible to see, and pretty exciting. So it's its own animal. It's something we highly recommend anyone get their hands on it, but also just get a demo with somebody from our team on the software side, because I can guarantee that based on what we've seen, that every time we actually show somebody what that product looks like, even if it's a virtual software demo, it's a completely different level of understanding than,
Yeah.
and it's guaranteed excitement and interest, if anything.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so talk to me more about the GenPop clients, because I'm really fascinated by this as well. Again, logical extension. If you're training rotational sports, 3D resistance, that just makes sense. But talk to me more about that, because I think that's really interesting. Because look, we've had those clients, right? We've had the client that's 70, 75, 80 years old. Their hips are shot, their knees are shot. We have run out of options for them in the gym, and we've had to have that. It's an awkward conversation, but it's like, look, like, gravity is winning right now. Like, literally, you should think about like YMCA, aqua aerobics, like that sort of thing, because of the buoyancy and the reduced stress. So talk to me about how people are using that with their Gen Pop clients. It doesn't have to be necessarily that example, but like
Yeah.
where it fits into like an overarching training program.
Yeah, well, I think for that population too, for example, at those more kind of mainstream commercial sites, one of the things that matters a lot is that they have a program and that they stick with it, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And like, because and ultimately, like I think you could make the argument that maybe it that actually matters more than the specific exercises or movements that they might be
For
doing,
sure.
right?
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we've found anyways is that in our experience working with those client types is the gyms really is that they typically will gate the usage with a trainer. So they don't just put it on the floor and you can walk up to it and use it. I think it's too new and different and for at this point in time.
Yes.
And we would recommend that, not being the case. It's going to take a couple of years before, I mean, our vision is that this is going to be more ubiquitous than a treadmill. But like, it's still, especially in the more mainstream population group, it's like they don't know what it is, right? And so it makes sense to have it gated by a trainer. But in doing so, we found that the experience is so positive and so different and unique and feels good and produces results in such a short amount of time. It can produce just a more frequency of scheduling sessions. In fact, we've seen an increase of one of the commercial sites we work with. We saw the first month they introduced Proteus to existing clients. Those same clients booked 77% more sessions.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
So
there you go.
scheduling an extra half hour on this week, right? Or like,
Yeah.
like, or an hour here, like, and that stuff translates to like, top line revenue for some of these gyms. It will and profit too as a profit center. So that's one part of it is like you're introducing an experience that people really like, that when introduced properly, which we provide, very basic training on like how to communicate it effectively to those different client types, all that sort of stuff, and why. It's really kind of addicting. Like we've got a population of 55 to 65-year-old women in southern New Jersey that train on Proteus 3 times a week for 15 minutes in lieu of going to the gym. They pay $25 for a 15-minute session 3 times a week. And they coined this term, "Do you Proteus?"
That's
It's like
awesome.
this community of like non-athletes, like
Yeah.
just, and the leader of it is this woman named Carol Lay, who is awesome. And she started using Proteus for to basically have an impact for prescription exercise for A1C marker.
Mm-hmm.
And so, any event, so it's really, really engaging that way. But what typically these gyms will use it for is a tool to expand the top of the funnel, to do assessments, to convert people to clients, right?
Yeah.
And because you can do, instead of saying, all right, well, I got to get someone in an hour, we got to do the FMS, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, all right, well, let's get on Proteus, and in 5-10 minutes, like we've got a full body, strength and power scan with these actual insights, and they've got, oh, how do I compare? They can compete. It's like very, very engaging. And in that same session, they can do the training session.
Yeah. Yeah, for
The
sure.
first training session, it's not like we just did the evaluation. Here's your plan. Maybe you'll come back. It's like, no, we're going to actually get to work, right?
Yes.
Session 1. And we've seen that translate to an increase in conversion rates. We've seen from 10% conversion to 42% conversion the first month.
Wow.
So that's how it helps the gyms, and ultimately, but it all ends up with, like, because it's valuable as a training tool and evaluation tool for the end user, whether they know it or not, initially, once they've done a test and gotten the information even as a takeaway, there's a tremendous amount of value there. And then what we're seeing is people coming back and working with trainers novice trainers now have better direction, and it's easier. It saves time in programming. And
Yes.
it's all these combination of efficiencies and experience and benefits that is what in aggregate makes Proteus, I think, so powerful and valuable in that environment.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I mean, one thing you said really stands out, and just talking about like the conversion rate and keeping people around longer. Now, obviously, there's monetary benefit to that, but like at the end of the day, I've talked about this for a very long time. Like, training should be fun. Most people don't enjoy training, right? There's a reason they hire us as trainers or as coaches, because they're not going to do it on their own, or they don't know what to do. So if you can make it fun and engaging and novel, but in a good way, not just like, hey, we're just doing random stuff. Like, no, like this is targeted and focused, but we're going to make it fun. That's huge. And then the other piece I love is this idea of gating equipment, because we're kind of moving into this model where we have independent trainers or independent coaches that work out of our space. We're going to have like an open gym model to some degree, but I'd already thought about this, right? Like gating equipment, like, sorry, random little Johnny doesn't get to come in and like test on the force plates or use the flywheel. Like, those are just off limits, right? Like, you're not prepared or skilled to use that. So I love this idea of, hey, look, we'd love for you to use this, but it's a little bit more advanced. We need you to work with somebody to understand really how to harness it and use it correctly.
Yep. 100%. 100%. I think also, like, it's always a struggle to train. Any client is like, it's always about, you want to establish what the goals are, right?
Yes.
And like, sometimes it's difficult for them to communicate, but understanding or getting to like the why behind like what they're trying to accomplish is like such a key part. But if you can establish like objective benchmarks and targets that like, and goals to hit, and you can track that objectively, and tie that to the why. Like, we're going to get, for example, we heard a story the other day, someone being like, there was a 40-year-old, new mom basically, who was doing core work on Proteus, but she was working with this client. She was like, where am I compared to like my peers? And he's like, well, let's look at the results. And he filtered them, by her age, sex, height, weight, whatever. And she's like, you're the 20th percentile for your age. And she was like, I want to be the 50th. And he was like, that's what we're going to work towards. Right.
That's
and like,
cool.
We're going to get to these numbers. So, like, that's a really, just as one example, and there's a lot of those opportunities there. And we like to say, like I said, it provides a superpower, I think, for any trainer and ultimately a business to really elevate the quality of their services while streamlining operations and ultimately, generating more revenue and producing better results. So on top of the great things they're already doing, right?
Yeah.
So that's it's an accelerant, right?
Yeah. I love that. I love that. And that's always been such a keystone for me, right? Like if you're going to take the time to assess somebody, I feel like that's one of the most valuable things you do,
Yes.
right? Like somebody comes in, you don't just start training them. You take the time to assess them, evaluate them, so you can customize a program. And this just, like you said, it's an accelerant and it gives you a lot of tools, a lot of information in a short period of time. So, what I'm really interested in now is, man, what's next? What are you guys working on? Like, what is the next evolution of Proteus, or at least whatever you can talk about for now?
Yeah. I think so. Great question. So we are. I like to say we're every day is. I'd say this from a general standpoint as an entrepreneur. Every day is like day one, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we've made incredible amount of progress that we're very proud about. But we're never comfortable, and I feel like we're probably doing about 1% of our total capabilities. And so there's a whole roadmap on both the hardware and software side. But just some quick hits that I'll talk about is like we're definitely going to be expanding the suite. We have kind of two standard attachments, a single hand universal and a two-hand revolving bar. We're going to be expanding the suite of attachments. And by the way, just those two attachments provide full body, like it is incredibly versatile as it is, but we're going to get a little bit kind of expand that suite. But the software is really where we're just getting started because we are capturing 20 proprietary metrics. We are really only focusing on the screen, on the display, a 27-inch touchscreen attached to Proteus on like 2 or 3 of them. So we're measuring things like linear range of motion and deceleration and consistency of movement. We're mapping power production in 3-dimensional space per rep. Like there's so many layers. It's so much overkill of data, which is why it's like tucked away in the interface because we realized early on it's super, super cool. But like the practical application of it it has not been developed. Right.
Yeah, for sure.
And we fully acknowledge that all we care about is like things that you can take action on now that matter and significant. You can't get anywhere else, and they're valuable and they're understandable. And so it's going to be, we're starting to explore, and we've made some recent breakthroughs on the implementing different artificial intelligence capabilities to help us make use of the data to then drive improvements in the software and the offerings, including different evaluations and reports based on different goal types, right? Because not everyone cares about power and strength, right? What people care about, right? Endurance, and people care about, like, Proteus can do all those things. We look at fatigue, we look at work output, we look at all that sort of stuff, intensity level. So things like fatigue and even mobility, right? And we've got so there's and I think the benefit of one of the many benefits we've provided to our client base so far is that they reap the rewards of this constant development. So if you talk to one of our clients from 2 years ago, they'd be like, the software looks completely different than it does today.
Yeah, sure.
Everything is cloud based. So like that's part of this. It's a long-term relationship. And then beyond that is is thinking about ways that we can create automatic personalized programs for individuals. Because we know so many of our partners are already manually transcribing Proteus data into their own programming. We are figuring out ways to do that job for them. And then beyond and basically have an output outside of the Proteus system. And then thinking about digital expansions of the product that are super interesting and exciting.
Okay. More to come, I'm sure. More to come.
Definitely.
Okay. I know you've listened to this show before, so I got the big question for you, my friend. If you could alter the space-time continuum and give young Sam Miller one piece of advice, what would it be?
How much time do I have to answer this question?
As much time as you want, man.
I think it would be, so one thing I actually like as a part of this answer, one thing that I like to say is people say like, oh, wouldn't you wish that you could go back in time and tell yourself how difficult this journey would be? And I'm like, no,
Well, you might not
not at
do it,
all.
right?
Yeah, like
You might stop.
part of,
Like, nah.
and this is why like a young entrepreneur, like entrepreneurs are most often younger because they're naive, right?
Yeah.
And it's true. I mean, it just, so it's almost like, but at the end of the day, it's like, that's all you're expected to have, face adversity. It's like, will you persevere? Do you care enough about something? Because if I fully subscribe to the idea that like, if there's a will, there's a way.
Mm-hmm.
So that advice would not be part of my go back in time advice, but I think it would be around, um, uh, basically maintain the same level of passion that you're going to maintain, but do not let that interfere with your and the kind of the struggles that you will face interfere with your psyche to the extent that you are asked existential questions about your capabilities. So I think there's a lot of self-doubt that comes along with this, and
Yes.
which is totally natural. And I think it would just be really words of encouragement around greater expectations about that will happen. That is normal.
Yeah.
And stay true and focused on what you were trying to accomplish, because that's the right direction. Don't let that distraction get in the way. And because that will create more struggle on top of the struggles that you already have. So that, I don't know if that's an answer you've heard before, but for me, that would be exceptionally important for me to hear.
Yeah. Well, so I was thinking about this the other day. If I had, like, if I could download all the content that I have in my brain that's never been put out anywhere, right? Like, oh, this great idea. Like the other day, I had this idea of just like, so much of this is just not quitting, right?
Oh man.
Like so much of this, like I know you've dealt with that. Like so many times I've thought, nope, I'm going to stop. I'm done with this gym. I'm done training people, whatever. Right.
Yep.
And then you have that moment of, no, I'm not going to, okay, it was a bad moment. Keep moving. Right.
Yep.
As an entrepreneur, especially in your space, right? I can't imagine how many times you probably thought, nope, this isn't worth it. Whatever. Or like, even if you knew you weren't going to act on it, just that moment of weakness where you're like, no, this is really hard. This is really getting frustrating. Just keep moving, man. Don't quit.
We shouldn't be alive still. Like,
Yeah.
And it is 100% true. It's just, but again, you got to listen to the signals. If what you're doing is really not working, or
Yes.
you have to have that awareness, right? And
Yes.
be very honest, right? Because there's definitely not good to just keep doing the same stuff over and over again and just trying to fight through it when you're like, this is not good, or this is
not feasible. It's not working.
Yeah. So for me, it was always like if we had, early clients or even clients today that were like, I don't believe in this. I don't like it. I'm not getting any benefits. Like there would be no reason for us to go forward, because what's the point of fighting these challenges? But for us, it's like, we know that there's something really big here. It's already working really well.
Yeah.
And we're just getting started. And so that's the underlying fuel. So it's like, if it gets easier a little bit over time because you've gone through a bunch of these ups and downs, you can have a little perspective, but at the same time, the highs get higher, the lows get lower. And if you can just be like, okay, this is a moment in time to figure out, that's key.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Okay. Last but not least, lightning round. 4 fairly short questions. Your answer can be as long or short as you like.
Okay.
Number 1, I'm excited about this one. The biggest headache you had in developing the first Proteus was?
It was, the biggest headache we had was actually getting constant resistance in all directions. So 3D resistance was without question unbelievably challenging mathematically. Get the flow right. It took years and an unbelievable amount of time to figure out.
And was it just you?
No, it was me and initially it was me and 1 to 2 other people.
Okay. Yeah. I'm just imagining you toiling away by yourself in your basement, like hair everywhere, sleepless nights. But I can see that.
That's an understatement, but yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I'm underrepresenting the struggle. Yeah. Okay. Number 2, what's the biggest lesson you've learned from your assessment process? So like what you have created and cultivated, what are you learning from that?
Can I ask a clarifying question? Do you mean learning from, from like the output of the information,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
from, okay.
That would be fine.
So from a data standpoint, okay, biggest thing that we're learning is that, one thing that I'll just call out is that like the movements that no matter what demographic we look at, the movements that people need kind of strength training the least are sagittal plane movements, and the movements that are most deficient in both strength and power are rotational movements.
Yeah.
That's
Yep.
one of the biggest things, no matter what demographic we look at. And I can get way more specific on different populations, but I think the overall summary answer to that question is we are learning and confirming, I think, that it is absolutely essential to be evaluating multiplanar and rotational movement. Period.
Yes. Yeah. So I meant to comment on this earlier and I kind of spaced out for a second. So I'll plug it in here. One of the things that I know I've talked about, Bill has talked about, is we talked about evaluating strength in the sagittal plane, right? Well, if you're going to evaluate it, you might as well train it. And I think we all know there's definitely, unless you're a power lifter, right, where strength is the end goal, there's definitely a sweet spot to this, right? Because you keep pushing for too long and eventually you become so sagittal dominant, you literally lose your ability to rotate. And so I would love to be able to evaluate that and take some of these kids, because there's a point where it's like, hey, let's just squat and trap our deadlift. And yeah, we can fill in the gaps with Proteus, but like just general force development is valuable. But then there's a point after 3, 4, 5 years, we don't know when it is, or I don't. But with this, we'd be able to evaluate it and say, okay, maybe we've topped this bucket off. Now we focus on these other measures. That's cool.
Yeah, and that's what this is unlocking, is like both identifying different athlete types, right? You get the springy, more elastic athlete, and you got the brute force type
Absolutely.
profile. It helps make those determinations, but also like the different movement categories across different planes, right, of the body, they're definitely not all equal. And so they should not be treated all equal. It starts with an evaluation, but where you want to focus is you want to kind of keep making progress, but kind of you don't want to have these huge separations. And one of the separations that we look at and find actually very common is this big separation between power and acceleration for different movements, where if you're way more powerful than you have acceleration, you're power dominant, and acceleration is what you need to focus on, right? So you need to train a lighter load at faster speeds. Whereas conversely, if you're, acceleration is significantly higher than power, and there's a huge gap there, your acceleration dominant and power is going to be the focus. And you're going to train at a, kind of more moderate resistance, that level that, and a certain velocity range. And those distinctions are unbelievably important. It's all about like, you've got to be able to, you've got this foundation of strength. You need to be there first. That's critical, right? And then from there, it's how do you use that? You got to be able to produce speed and then explosive movements and across different planes of the body. And everyone has a different starting place. And this allows you to figure out optimally where to focus time to get the best bang for your buck.
Yeah. Yeah. One other thing that I've thought a lot about here lately is this idea of being able to evaluate strength, power, speed, whatever physical quality we're talking about, without the constraint of being locked into the technique of a lift. So here's what I mean by that. There are plenty of athletes on a basketball court or on a soccer pitch that we would describe as strong. But you put them in a weight room and you're like, oh, this guy can't back squat, his way out of a wet paper bag, or he can't trap our deadlift. You're like, so how does that work? But there's a technical element to this, right? So I love these ideas of evaluations that aren't so like technique specific, to where you could have somebody, they suck on a soccer field, but they're an amazing squatter. So their numbers are amazing. Yes. So like being able to find that transfer of, hey, what's like really usable on a field, court, or pitch that we can evaluate, that we don't have to like learn a technique to evaluate, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. It's a great point. I agree with you. Yeah.
Okay. So something else we talked about, this is number 3. I think you already touched on this. Did you say you guys have 1 billion data points now?
1 billion.
Oh my God, that's so crazy. That's like such a mind-blowing number.
Yeah, it's actually more than that, but it's for the one kind of primary power metric we have. It's 1 billion data points. I mean, last year alone, 2023, 100 million reps were performed on Proteus systems across the country.
Wow.
So these are, like I said, this is not a toy. This is not something that sits in any of these facilities and it's like, use it every once in a while. This is a key piece of these businesses that now I think very much revolve around them. And so we're looking for, continuation of these great pioneers, to, continue to partner with and adopt Proteus. And we got a full team behind, working with them on that journey.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, last but not least, we asked about what's next for Proteus. What's next for Sam Miller, man? What are you working on? What are you excited about? Or is it just synonymous? Proteus, Sam Miller, it's like all the same thing.
It's synonymous. I think if just, truthfully, I've got, we got a great kind of family life, a wife and kids, I think is, that's all awesome. I think it's definitely going to find a more consistent, like I've been in and out and traveling and, trying to get like a more consistent schedule there.
Yes.
And ultimately, I think what's next for us is I think we are going to take a vacation for the first time.
Good for you, man. That's awesome.
I think over the years I've realized oh, this is a very important thing to do. And, so that personally, I think that hopefully is coming up in 2024, but I've said that before and I've been wrong about it.
Okay. So I've got to clarify, kids or no kids?
Yeah. 2 kids, 2 young boys.
No. I know you have kids. Would the vacation be with kids or without kids?
Oh, great question. So in a perfect world, without.
Okay. See, that is the definition of a vacation. You know the definition. Okay. A time away without kids is a vacation. Going somewhere with your children is a trip. And there is a distinct difference.
It's actually going somewhere with your kids is business travel, right? There's no, I've gone on, we go to Martha's Vineyard every year as a family, like with the kids, and I come back and my colleagues are like, oh, how's the trip? You like feeling relaxed? And I'm like, not even a little bit.
Not at all. I'm excited to get back to work actually.
Totally. Yeah. So this is 100% without kids. I love my kids, they're the best, but this
understood.
Is
you can love them and still enjoy a couple of days away from them.
And you need to. Yes, exactly.
And you're that much more excited when you get back. You realize how much you missed them.
That's
right. Sam, dude, this has been amazing, man. It's so great catching up with you, learning more about Proteus. Where can my listeners find out more about you?
Sure. Visit our website, proteusmotion.com, Proteus motion.com. There's some good resources on the website, but if any of the listeners are interested in either finding a place to try Proteus or learning more about the product, I highly, highly, highly recommend hit the blue button on the website, request a demo, put in your information, and we'll be in touch. We want to talk and talk to somebody on our team. They are phenomenal, and that's where you'll really learn. So there's that. And then if you're on social media, Instagram, we got a great content and resources there. That's actually one of the best places is at Proteus Motion, Twitter and Instagram, but Instagram specifically.
Perfect. I'll make sure I get the links in the show notes. So if you're listening at home, you'll be able to find that quickly and easily. But Sam, man, this is amazing. Thank you so much for your time, brother.
Thank you so much, Mike. It was a pleasure to be here.